Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about a surprise opening known as the Alekhine Defense. I assume you like moving the knight early in the opening and have seen various players shout at you for it. So now I'm going to give you an opening as an excuse to do this. So, this is the Alekhine Defense, which was prospered from the world champion Alexander Alekhine, though he didn't commonly play this opening, which doesn't make any sense, but still. So e4, we're going to be breaking this up in a few parts. I don't know why c5 is here, we're just going to delete that. So e4, knight f6. Now, there are a lot of variations. Your opponent can literally play f3, but we're going to start with the more common variations, which are e5 and knight c3. So let's start with the main line, which is e5, knight to d5. Um, I don't want knight to g8 here either. This is just bad. So knight to d5, and now white has a variety of moves. We are going, and it's not as intimidating as you think it is. We're going to start with d4, which is one of the main lines. White is grabbing the center, but since Alekhine is a hypermodern opening, our main idea here is d6 and bishop to g4 if a knight ever arrives on f3. So we must play d6. Knight to b6 is bad. So we have d6, knight to f3. Now we can either delay this with bishop to g4, but I prefer immediately playing bishop to g4, bishop to e2, e6, castles, bishop to e7. We continue with regular development, as you'll see in the Alekhine. Usually we would like to, sometimes we put our bishop on g7 if this diagonal is freed up, but this diagonal is currently clogged, so we will put it on e7. e6 kind of looks weird, but it's actually pretty good, and it's fine. And when white plays c4, we always want to play knight to b6, no matter what, usually. Knight to b6, knight to c3, castles. And we're just continuing with regular development. And when we can, we'll strike in the center. And now we kind of get a dream French where our bishop is outside of the pawn structure. And it's a better Khan since um, our pawn structure doesn't include c6 yet, and our bishop isn't as vulnerable. So we have c5. This is an interesting move that white can play. Bishop f3. We force if here, white lets go of this square, which will probably happen. But another option is also gf3, where we back up and we simply play a6. This looks scary, but white's queen's king side is what white should be scared of, and not us. Bishop to d3, f5. We break since we want to open it up. This isn't good. White has two isolated pawns, and this pawn is really weak with potential kingside attacking ideas. So king to h1 getting out of the way is fine. Knight to e7, rook to g1, and we simply have a good attack. White has no progress on the queen side. Potentially he'll go a4, but there's nothing really that he can accomplish with this. We can just take, and opening up the a file will benefit us only. And now the king side is all of ours for taking. We can play like queen to e8, queen to g6. That is kind of stupid. You can play king to h8, rook to g8, g5, all this stuff. So overall, we're not exactly better. I would say this is unclear, but it is actually an interesting idea for people like me who don't. I mean, a lot of people say about the Alekhine's defense is that it's really cramped. I would say not. I mean, if it's a close position, it's a sharper game, and I would feel like it's better to have a sharper game. in my case. So another possible variation here is with knight to f3. No, we saw looked at this. So let's say white plays this variation. No, c4. There's no c4. Okay. So let's say he plays c4 first. Knight to b6 and d4. This is the three pawns attack, which is kind of evident. He play in the same way. And if white wants, he can continue with his regular development. We'll play d5, g6, and seize the diagonal with the bishop. We'll go into this deeper a bit later. Or else we can just if they play f4, this is personally my recommendation against Alekhine. This is known as the four pawns attack, which is also partially evident. D bishop to f5 is my personal favorite variation, where there are many lines. But I mean, you can play bishop to f5, but things get a bit complicated. White should play bishop to d3. If not, we can just continue with like I know knight to c3. We can just continue with knight to c6. This is never scary because we can always go to b4. And let's say they play a3 first to prevent b4. We can just take, and now this is harmless because we hop in the center. So if they take first, we can just take here. So there's no really harm in e5 ever. Just to remember knight b4. And if white somehow prevents knight b4, you should always take. But it is also nice to keep the tension sometimes. That was the wrong variation. Yeah. Okay. So, but they usually play bishop to d3 in my experience too. Takes. We should relieve all the tension. And now we're going to go target the d4 pawn. The whole point of the Alekhine's defense is to prove that e5 is overextended. So, to do that, we can either strike at the center of what's defending e5, which is d4, or use some sort of tactic to take e4. Now we're threatening knight to c6. It's not really a threat, but this is usually how we continue in development in the four pawns attack. We remember always to prevent d5. That's a really important point. If you forget d5, you're worse. So you have to prevent d5. Unless e4 is going to be hanging if they push d5, of course. Bishop to e3. White sometimes doesn't know what to do here. So but we know a solid plan. Here, an interesting idea is to play queen to d7. I would rather just continue with the regular development. But if you're in dire need of a win, you can go with. If you really want to draw, you can go with bishop to b4, and then just wait, castle short. But an interesting idea is actually castling long if you're looking for an attack. It looks like white has a massive head start, but it's actually not that simple because our knights are actually helping. Why was that green? Defend the queen side. In hindsight, our knights are helping us. Knight to c3, f6. We undermine the pawn chain. This is a pretty important idea in the French too. You usually see f6 when long castles. You undermine the pawn chain, and in this case, you want to open up the g file. This is a horrible move. Because now, let's say play here, you open up the g file for black, and you're just letting us have an attack on you, which isn't good. So, you take. Oh, this is actually the whole line. Oh wow, I'm crazy. Okay, so that's what happens. Um, an alternative I is probably in hindsight better now is DE5, the main line. C5, or you can continue with bishop F5, which is probably what I would recommend. Knight to c6 is a bit risky, but it basically has the same idea. Early transposes, but c5 is also an aggressive idea. So we'll be looking at that now. D5, E6, knight to C3, takes, and now C4, pushing forward, D6, knight to C6, bishop to F4. I mean, if I were playing the Alekhine, I wouldn't play this variation, but for those aggressive people out there, you might like this. We basically allow white to get in this huge center and trick him into thinking he's actually winning. But nevertheless, we're down material. If you capture here, there is queen to here. So you have to play this one down here. They back up. And actually, we have a decent position. We can't castle. But our general plan is to trade off the queens. And since we're up a pawn, we have chances. But this land is really sharp, and I won't recommend it for people. So I would recommend something like the casual. Probably bishop to f5 is slightly better. In e6, bishop to b4, c5. No, I wouldn't recommend c5, just knight to c6. Looks fine to me. But, and like, regular stuff. But I guess c5 is an option too if you're still hyper aggressive. Our plan in this line is to target. I'm sorry if I'm going a bit fast, but our plan in this line is to target the c4 pawn because this is kind of a Nimzo Indian structure, and the c4 pawn will be the target. If they capture here, they have a triple pawn structure, which I'm sure you don't want. And this pawn is weak, so this wins a pawn back. Actually, usually when they capture on c5, there's always knight to d7, and you fork these two pawns. That's an important point to remember. But let's say they play like this. This is really weird. But basically, you just win the pawn and you win the game. So the four pawns is slightly confusing. There also is this variation, which is kind of weird. We'll look at that later. So I'm just gonna go a bit into the more popular variations. Instinctively, people don't want to push forward because they think, oh, that's probably wrong. So they play knight to c3, which is actually a good move, but I'm the most comfortable in this variation. We play d5, and we strike in the center, and now we don't have to play with the cramped position actually. E5 or E5 here is the most popular move. And you can play in a French style for all those French lovers. E6 is actually the most critical variation. Now there's a really long line that goes like this, this, this. But this is actually really important to remember because some people sacrifice on E6 because it's a more instinctual move, but some people get scared also. D4, C5, we strike in the center. This is always an important thing. Like in the French, you should always play c5 as early as possible. By the way, you can't take this because you can take this back. If they play d4, we can play c5. Because if they take here, we can take here. Okay, we'll just look at that later. Can't finish my thoughts. So, this is an important... Wait, wrong variation. This is an important variation to know. c5. Bishop to d3 is a critical move. Basically, it's white wants to play queen to h5, but that gets hit by g6. So white is now threatening queen to h5, which is actually checkmate. g6, we must block it. dc5. We don't need to take. This is an important concept, as I mentioned in my other videos, which you can check out. You don't want to take unless you have to take. b4, you might want to say, oh, b4, it's scary, but then you hung your knight. Good job. So, h4 is a critical move. White is taking advantage of our ability to not castle because of this clogged queenside and is trying to attack us. It's c5, h5, queen to a5. We don't care. Takes, 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 takes. We back up here and we sack the queen. If you take here, Actually, this is a positional sacrifice. Oh, it's check. Never mind, never mind. It's not sacrifice. And we are officially better because we have this structure, but we are up a pawn, and this pawn is weaker than our pawns, essentially. So we'll look at a few more variations. D5. So E5 is the most popular, and G3 I've never seen in my life. It's usually D4. And we can go in the Scandi kind of variation. I love this variation personally. So what we do is G6 and C5, and we attack this beautifully weak um structure, and white can't do anything about it. Bishop to B2 is common, but do you really want to put your bishop on this diagonal? Nobody plays bishop to A3 in my life, but you might see it. Queen to C7. And now look at this. White has the bishop pair. I mean, I would take here personally, but I don't think you really have an option. You can just wait, I guess. But taking is also interesting because look at this. We have so much pressure on this pawn. Even this is actually probably better. No, wait, no, that's a free pawn. Never mind. E6. And we have so much pressure on this pawn, and our bishops are absolutely destroying his position. Let's say, oh, this doesn't look that good. I mean, like queen t2. I don't know what queen t2 does. Queen here. But this diagonal, and look at our bishops. Bop, bop. And this c3 pawn is gonna get rook to c8, and like knight to a5. So we're actually better. So, I'm gonna leave it at that for today. I will release more parts if this is marginally better. Or if you guys don't like this, I will discontinue the series. So like and subscribe, do whatever YouTube stuff. Go check out my stuff. Thank you. See you later. Whatever. Blah blah blah. Bye.